at the State Department of Education, and I have a real brief outline of how the evening will flow tonight. But first of all, I'd like to make a couple of acknowledgments. We would like to especially acknowledge and thank Superintendent Arthur McMillan and his staff for welcoming us here to Biloxi tonight. We really appreciate your hospitality, and this is a great facility. We're glad to be here. We've got a good crowd. I would also like to recognize, I know we have a number of superintendents, administrators, board members from various locations around the area. So if you would please let us welcome you, please. Any superintendent, board member, or administrator out there, please stand and let us recognize you. Thank you. This is our fourth session. We started last week in North Mississippi and Central Mississippi, and this week we'll be in this is our sixth session, sorry. We'll be in South Mississippi, we were in Natchez last night in Southwest. Here tonight, and we'll wrap up. I guess we'll be in Hattiesburg tomorrow. We're all running together, so we appreciate you being here. These sessions would not have been made possible without the partnership of two organizations that we partner with, and they are the Mississippi Parent-Teacher Association. Rachel Bland, who's the state president, who couldn't be with us tonight, but she's been with us throughout several sessions, as well as the Mississippi Library Commission. We partner with them, and they help us set these sessions up throughout the state, so we appreciate their support. We also would like to recognize some special guests that are in the audience tonight, and these folks that I'm sure you know, and these are lawmakers that I work with mostly on a daily basis throughout January, throughout the legislative session. We have with us Senator Bryce Williams. Senator, thank you so much. Representative Scott Delano. Representative Charles Busby. And we have Representative Carolyn Coffin. And those are the representatives and senators that I saw coming in, so I don't miss anyone. But we really appreciate you being here. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to learn tonight more about Mississippi's more college and career readiness standards, also known as Common Core state standards. And we have with us tonight Dr. Lynn House, who I'll introduce in a second. I'm sure everyone picked up information on as you walked into the auditorium tonight. We will take questions at the end of the presentation, so at the end of the presentation, if you have a question, please write them on those blue cards that you have, and our staff will come by and pick them up at the end, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. We can't promise that we'll get to all of them, but the ones that we don't get to, we have a living, breathing document that we update on a daily basis with frequently asked questions, and those can be found on our website at the Department of Education. So again, we'll get to as many questions as we can, but if we don't get to your question, we will make sure we include it on the frequently asked questions list. To introduce you to some of the staff members that are here tonight for the Department of Education, we have Nathan Oakley, who is in our curriculum and instruction. He's also a Common Core specialist. Thank you. We have Patrice Guilfoyle, who is our Director of Communications. You met in the back, passing out the information. We also have Washington Cole, who's here, who's the Executive Assistant to the Superintendent. And I think that's it with the acknowledgments and questions. So we'll get right to the program. Introducing Dr. House. Dr. House was named Interim State Superintendent in July of 2012 after serving as the Deputy State Superintendent of Education for Instructional Enhancement and Internal Operations. She previously served at the Department of Education as the Director of Federal Programs. Prior to returning to Mississippi, Dr. House was the Louisiana Board of Regents Deputy Commissioner for Academic and Student Affairs. She has had a lot of K-12 experiences, all the way from a principal to teacher, and now interim state superintendent of education. She begins her 39th career as an educator. This is her 39th year, sorry, as an educator. Dr. House has held positions in the college ranks as a professor, director, chair, and dean in both the public and private sector. She has degrees from the University of New Orleans, Furman University, and the University of Mississippi. She's originally from DeSoto County and has resided in many states, which led her back to Mississippi. So if you would, please welcome Dr. Lynn House as she comes to explain to us more about Common Core State Standards. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much for being here this evening. We've got a lot of information that we're going to attempt to share with you, and as Pete has said, at the close we'll provide an opportunity for you to ask questions. What I hope you will do, thank you Nathan, because you know I'm going to follow over all that. What I hope you will do is, as we're discussing a particular topic or an aspect of Common Core, I hope you'll use the card that you've been given and write your questions down. And when we get to the question and answer period, the wonderful staff that are here from the MD will come by and pick up those cards, so we'll try to get through as many of your questions as we possibly can. I'd like to just reiterate what Pete has said. We know we won't get to all the questions this evening because there's usually quite a number. But we do hope that if we don't get to yours, we'll make sure that you look on our website for frequently asked questions site within Common Core to see what your questions are all about in terms of the response, as well as look for other kinds of questions that we've had from other sessions, because all questions asked and given to us will be reflected in that FAQ document. We also have a dedicated email address that we hope you will utilize to send questions in if you have others that you think about later after you leave today. So we're going to try to again be very mindful of your time, but move along briskly as we discuss this very important topic. Here are some questions that we're going to attempt to answer as we roll through the information today. What does global education look like around the world? What does Mississippi's educational landscape look like? Why should we move to higher standards? Where do we get the standards? How do they compare with the current standards? And what does it really mean for you and your children? And indeed, the state of Mississippi. Some of the notions about why we need to focus on helping our children, your children, be college and career ready are noted for you on this slide. But you could have answered that question without the slide, by all means. We know we want our children to all get good jobs. I'm a mother of two. My sons, fortunately, have gone through their elementary years or secondary years and graduated from college. But I can tell you, the day they got a job or off my payroll was an exciting day for me as a parent. My husband certainly shares that philosophy. So again, we want the success of our children, not only in whatever post-secondary training they go into, whether it's a 2-year program, a 4-year program, or into some other technical training program. We want them to be successful. We want them to get a job that pays well. We also want them to be ready for whatever the 21st century throws at them. We do not know what the world of work, our world indeed in general, is going to look like in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Who would have thought we'd be doing today what we do with technology? Now, I'm really old. Most of you are much younger than I, but I can tell you, when I used to watch Batman and see the phone in the car, I never thought that would be a reality. I certainly didn't think I'd be carrying around one in my pocket or in my purse. I couldn't even have envisioned, as either a student myself or a parent of students, iPads and iPods and other handheld devices that we have now. We do not know what the future is going to look like, but we know we want our children to be prepared to handle it. So again, that's part of what we've got to concentrate on. We also know that we want our economy in our state and in our country to be strong. There's not a Mississippian around who doesn't want that to happen. So that's part of what we're doing here, is thinking about what's going to push our state forward and what's going to push our country forward. So let's start with thinking about the global landscape. What does the educational landscape look like in other countries that are trying to be competitive with us? Got a series of slides, and you may not be able to see everything on the slide, but I think you'll get the point as we think about what this represents. Over on the left-hand side, your left, you'll see a list of countries with a dot next to those countries of different colors. Then excuse me, I'll try to make my voice rest. Then what you see on the vertical axis is cost per student. Then on the horizontal axis, it's discussing the notion or showing the notion of how many students are graduating from college. Tertiary education is what the term that's used on this particular slide. And so you can think of it as elementary education, secondary education, and tertiary education. So it's the third level, if you will, of education, and that's a term used internationally. And so you can see the graduate supply and the cost. The big white bubble in the middle represents the U.S., and then you see some of the other countries, Finland and Germany and Poland and United Kingdom and some other countries represented in other colors and other sizes. The size is reflective of the population. This is 1995, and we're going to show you a slide from 2000 and then one from 2005 or 6. And what I want you to really focus on is what happens to our bubble, the white bubble, in relation to the other countries. See what we do in terms of movement on this chart. So there's 2000, and there's 2006. What did the U.S. do? Basically stayed about the same. We went up a little bit, so going up a little bit means what? We're spending more. We're spending more. And there are a gazillion studies out there that would tell you we spend way more than most other countries do on the 4-year degree process. What happened to the other countries? Where'd they go? This way? Yeah. And so when people tell you U.S. is doing worse than we've ever done, that's really not accurate. We're not doing worse, but we're about the same. But what's happened is those other countries paid attention to the competition. And there's, again, study after study that tells you that's what happens in the countries that have the most successful educational systems. They're watching the competition. They're learning from the competition. They want to get better than the competition. So they're seeing what the competition does. They figure out ways to improve on what the competition is doing. That's what we need to do in education. That's the model business uses all the time. You want to be competitive. And we've never really in education thought about it much that way, but we have to now. If we're going to be globally competitive, we have to pay attention to what other countries on the globe, around the globe, are doing with their educational system. So that's the point of this series of slides. 2 other data points, and there are others that we can share. This is just to give you a sense of what's going on around the world. Pearls and TIMS are 2 assessments in which the U.S. participates along with a host of other countries. Pearls really looks at 4th grade reading around the globe, and then the TIMS assessment focuses on math and science in 4th grade and in 8th grade. So I want you just to think about what those assessments might look like. Here's our rank, and you can see with Pearls, the one that looks at literacy, there are 49 other countries that participate. You see our rank, and then 63 countries participate in TIMS, and you see our rank. 7th, 9th, 6th, 12th, and 11th. There's not a first place up there. There's not a second place up there. There's not a third place up there. Now, I will tell you we're improving. If we had looked at these numbers, and this is from 2011, if we did look at these numbers 4 years before that, our rank would be even worse. So we've started to sort of wake up in education and say we better amplify, enhance our efforts and get us moving back in the right direction. We may not be one, but we certainly don't want to see ourselves in 11th and 12th. That's just really not acceptable, and I'm sure you feel the same way. We deserve to be one or two. We've got plenty of smart children, hardworking children, smart, hardworking parents, smart, hardworking teachers, and other educators. So we've got the resources, the raw material to get the job done. We've just got to get ourselves into that competitive mode to look at what other countries are doing and try to improve upon what we see. So what do we look like as a state? This is the ACT profile report. Some of you may have already seen this chart. It basically shows what our percentage of students who are meeting the benchmarks for college readiness look like in relation to the national average. So Mississippi is blue and the nation is red. So are you satisfied with what you see here? I'm not. I mean, really, I'm definitely not. We look better in English than we do in the other subjects, but you see only 11% of the Mississippi students who are graduating and take the ACT are termed ready for college by ACT. And I think we all would recognize that ACT is an appropriate, worthy measure. That's what we use it for, is college entry. It gives us a snapshot of how well students are going to do. Well, I'm not happy with 11% at all. Because again, we have the raw material. We've just got to get better at what we're doing. NAEP, many of you probably are aware of NAEP. NAEP is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. It is a national test. It's given every other year. It's given grades 4 and 8 all across the country. And it's really used as a measure of how states compare with one another and how states measure up with rigorous standards. 22% of our 4th grade students in reading were termed proficient. The national average is 32%. 21% in 8th grade for us, 32% nationally. Math, 25% in our state, 40% nationally. 19% of 8th graders proficient in math in Mississippi, 34% nationally. Those numbers don't make me real happy either. Remedial education is another sort of benchmark for whether we're where we need to be. We're spending, as every legislator in this room could tell you, entirely too much money on remedial education taking place at our 2- and 4-year institutions. You heard from the bio that Pete was reading that I've had experience on that side of the house, as we say it. And I can tell you that college professors at the freshman level struggle with what to do with our students who don't come prepared. And so they're saying to us, you've got to ramp it up, folks, in K-12, because what you're doing is not adequately preparing students for college. And so again, this is what we call a P20 effort. It's got to be everyone engaged in the educational community, as well as parents in the community as a whole, to really respond to these issues. There's no silver bullet. One does not exist. It's really a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of focus across the entire educational community, indeed across the community as a whole. Here's our performance on our state tests. So if you can, think about the percentages you just saw. In a minute, I'm going to show you a chart. We're going to show you a chart that shows NAEP again, so you can sort of compare the two. This chart basically looks at the current Mississippi assessments that assess or test our current standards. And so you've got at the top the subject area test, version 2, because by the way, there was a version 1. So going to more rigorous standards and the companion assessment is a normal process that we do in our state. So SATP2, the subject area test, version 2, tests our students in 4 areas. And you see up there our proficient and above scores for 10, 11, and 11, 12. Okay? So in Algebra 1, 76.4, 74.6, you see biology, you see English 2, you see U.S. history. We changed tests in 11, 12, so that's the first benchmark we have for the new U.S. history test. Below that, you see MCT version 2. So again, there was a Mississippi curriculum test for grades 3 through 8, version 1. This is measuring the standards associated with version 2. And you can see that all but one of the percentage proficient and above were in the 50s. So we range from low 50s up to the high 50s. And then we have 7th graders at the 60% mark. So think about those general percentages. And now we're going to go back and look at native again. Try to think about where we stand in percent of students proficient and above on our current assessments and how that compares with native. So again, 19, 21, 22, we're at 25%, 19%, 22%, and 21%. I hope what you are thinking about is that there's a difference. That what we're seeing on NAEP, which is a rigorous assessment, no doubt whatsoever, but what we're seeing on NAEP in terms of proficient and above does not mirror what we're seeing on our current assessments, proficient and above. So there's a non-alignment. They don't line up appropriately. So again, one of the things we've got to do is continue to push the rigor up. Now please bear in mind that when this test is given, NAEP is given around our country to every state, every other year. It's given to a random sample as well. And so this doesn't reflect every single student in the grades that are tested in our state. So it's not a perfect comparison of apples and oranges. But I can tell you that the same thing's happening in every other state, and every other state is not at the bottom. Every other state's percentages don't look like our percentages. And so it's just, again, a reminder that if we want to remain competitive, not only with Alabama and Arkansas and Louisiana and Tennessee and our other neighbors close to us, we've got to be competitive across this country, and again, internationally, we've got to be globally competitive. So the why are we raising academic standards? I hope I've helped you think about the response to that question with what I said already. Our board's vision, the State Board of Education's vision, starts out with the statement that we want to create a world-class educational system. World-class. That means that it's got to compete with the world. It's got to be reflective of what's expected around the globe for educated people. We want our students, again, to be globally competitive, which I've already said about 12 times, I think. So that's the intention. Our standards now aren't bad standards by any means. Again, remember we had MCT1, MCT2, SATP1, SATP2. So raising the standards is a normal process, but they're not good enough. They're not good enough. Not if we want to improve, and if we're satisfied. If you're satisfied with all those numbers you just saw, we can just stick with what we're doing, and that'll be just fine. But you've got to be satisfied with what you saw that compares us with the rest of our country. We want the high-paying jobs to come here. We want them to come here because we have an educated workforce. We want our economy to be the strongest it can possibly be. And that's going to be dependent on continuing to grow our economy, to develop jobs of all kinds, of all types. But we want high-paying jobs. We don't just want minimum wage jobs in our state. That's not the way to grow our economy. And I know those of you who know much more than I do about economic development could bear that out. Trying to make sure we've got consistent and clear expectations is another piece of the puzzle. The whole work that we're doing now around our accountability model and trying to improve that accountability model so it's clear and understandable by anybody who looks at it, really is a partner with looking at how the standards need to be improved for our students. There's been some confusion around the terms standards and curriculum. Standard is a goal. It's a measure of someplace you want to be. If you want to raise $20 million in your United Way campaign, that's a goal. How do you get to that goal? Probably 15 different activities going on simultaneously. The more creative, the better. The more people involved, the better. There's not just one way to raise $20 million. There's tons of ways to do that. Some examples that I've read or heard or been told that I wish I could claim, but I can't, revolving around things like building code. The question that caused that response was around creativity. Aren't the standards going to remove the creativity from our teachers? Absolutely not. You've got building code, that's a standard. The building code is we're going to make sure our buildings are safe and appropriate for our state. And people who know about building codes are the ones who helped us know what those standards should be. You wouldn't want me putting together building codes because I don't know anything about that. Those standards for building have not diminished the creativity of architects. Have they? No. You can look all over our state in any community, including the beautiful communities along the coast, and see various and sundry buildings, including schools. Different colors, different shapes, different sizes, different number of floors, different furnishings inside, different type of materials used on the outside. So a standard of any sort, doesn't diminish creativity. One of the most recent that I've heard examples of standards and curriculum is one that fits beautifully with this season of the year, when we're all tuned in to football. So the standard is you want to make the first down, right? So what do you have to do to acquire a first down? You got to get 10 yards. Right, exactly. You've got to get 10 yards. So the standard is first down requires 10 yards. How do you get those 10 yards? Is there only one way? Yeah, a gazillion ways. I really love it when I get to watch a ball game and it's got all that lateral passing stuff. That's my husband, who's a former football coach, says it's just a bunch of fluff and it'll fail the second time they try. But I love the surprises. And that's the kind of creativity that gets me excited when I walk into a classroom too. So the curriculum, the what you do to get to the standard is in the hands of the teachers who are in the classroom. Nobody from Jackson can possibly control what goes on in every classroom every day. Not possible, nor would we want to. The strategies that teachers use, the texts they use, the methodologies they use, the other resources they bring in, are really decisions made in the classroom with the assistance of principals, because it has to be built on what teachers are comfortable doing and what works for students. Some of us, I would be one, I like to use music and skits and raps and a lot of movement. That may not work for every teacher. And so it's got to be something that fits the context of the teacher and the teacher's children. So I hope you won't be confused by some of the things that are out there about curriculum and standards, because the curriculum is a local decision. The standards are set by the state. Just some things that I've really already mentioned, just as a reminder, just some quick bullets around Common Core. I've already talked about being college and career ready and the international benchmarking. And in a moment, we'll look at the history of how the Common Core state standards were put together. Equity is something I haven't mentioned, but it's pretty important. One of the things we know is that students should all have the same opportunity to learn. And they should all be held to a high standard, high expectations, regardless of their zip code. A family that was in the audience last night when we were in Natchez said, I was a military child. And it's so important that we understand that when military families move, it's great to know that they're going someplace where the standards are going to be the same. So that's another piece of that equity issue. The clarity of purpose, the standards are focused, they're coherent. In other words, they all work together. They're not just disjointed and fragmented, and they're clear. Even though I will say that there are some of the language arts standards that I still have to digest very carefully when I read them. The last one is one I haven't talked about, but I can tell you as an educator, it's extremely important, and I think the educators in the room would bear that out because I know all the collaboration that takes place, not only from classroom to classroom or school to school within a district, but also across districts along the coast and in South Mississippi. Educators for a long time, and again, I've been doing this for 39 years, starts my 39. What we've talked about for a long time is why do we keep reinventing the wheel? Why don't we share with one another? Why do we all do the same thing and not talk among ourselves about what's happening? We've said that at the local level, school level, state level, across regions. That's one of the reasons why SRED, the Southern Region Educational Board, gets so much buy-in from states within the Southern region, and now we actually have states from outside the South joining SRED. It's because it's a collaborative unit where we share ideas. So the opportunity to work with Common Core and share resources across states is one we've never had before. We've never really had a venue, an opportunity to talk about things we could share because standards were so different from state to state. And now we're doing that. I can't get any of the other states to share money with us. I have tried that one, just so you know, legislators. I'm trying to raise money, okay? But they've shared everything else. They've shared things their money has helped develop, and they'll continue to do that. And that's just a real strength for the effort to make our nation strong, because it really is not just about our state, but making the U.S. the strongest country it